One of the key concerns I get from international student is the worries around finding suitable student accommodation when they're looking to study in Australia. In today's video, I'm going to discuss the 6 different accommodation options available to you as an international student in Australia. And as well as providing you those 6 different options, I'm also going to discuss what your rights are and what other little quirky things you need to be aware of when you are looking to rent accommodation, especially if it's off campus or sharing a house or living on your own.
You have 6 different accommodation options when you are in Australia. This includes homestay, host and guest house accommodation, rental property, on-campus housing, residential college accommodation, and apartment accommodation. So let's take a closer look in more detail of each. Single or shared rooms are generally available and costs vary by type of room, but they are usually between 150 and 350 Australian dollars per week. Although meals are generally covered under the cost, self-catered homestay is also available. As a registered homestay agent myself, I can assist you to find a family to live with if this is something that you would prefer to explore. Otherwise, as option 2, you may choose hostel and guest house accommodation. Some international students may choose to stay in hostels or guest house accommodations. Kitchen and bathroom facilities are shared, and students cook for themselves in this type of accommodation. At around 120 to 180 Australian dollars a week, this accommodation tends to be cheaper than university or homestay accommodation. They also provide a valuable opportunity for social interaction amongst other international students from all over the world. Option 3 is living in a rental property. Many students in Australia choose to share the costs of a rental property with several housemates if they do not have family in Australia to share with. Students who choose this type of housing may either move into a pre-established household or they may set up a household with friends. In other cases, a student may rent their own property depending on their financial circumstances. Students generally have to provide some or all of the household's furniture as rental properties are rarely furnished here in Australia. Rental accommodation generally costs around 300 to 500 Australian dollars per week, and it might be better to share. Shared rental accommodation costs around 150 to 350 Australian dollars per week, depending on the location. The closer you are to the city centre, the higher the cost may be. The reason for this is due to the convenience of having shops and transportation close by. This accommodation usually requires payment of rent in advance, as well as security payment, which is generally equal to 1 month's rent paid up front. We refer to this as a bond payment. The reason for the bond payment is to ensure that you, as the tenant, look after the property while you are using it, and if there are any damages, the money can be given to the landlord to make any particular repairs required.
When it comes to rental accommodation, one thing I do want to point out is that you have rights. Doesn't matter what type of accommodation that you undertake, it's important for you to know where to go if you feel like your rental rights have been breached, irregardless of the accommodation type that you may have. So on my screen, what I'm going to do is show you a number of different websites, and I'm going to share them in the link below, of where you can go to get more information about your rights when it comes to renting some form of property here in Australia. If you're not familiar with Australia, there are actually 8 different states and territories combined that make up the country. So, for example, we have the Australian Capital Territory, so the ACT, and on my screen here, I've also got the link. So if there's anything about tenancy rights that you need to come and find out about, you can come here free of charge Then we have the New South Wales Fair Trading. So again, this is about protecting your rights as an international student. Then we also have the Northern Territory information. So again, what you can do about protecting your rights as well. Then we also have the Queensland government, who talking about starting a tenancy, during tenancy, ending a tenancy. So tenancy is that you are the tenant, if you're not sure about that, and you're paying a landlord. In the video, I also mentioned about bonds. So here there's some information about lodging a bond and refunding a bond. They are very similar across all the states and territories, just to be clear on that. So we also have the consumer and business services for South Australia. We then have the consumer building and occupational services for Tasmania. And we have the Consumer Affairs Victoria to protect your rights here in Victoria. And then finally, we have the Government of Western Australia, Department of Mines, Industry, Regulations and Safety that talk about tenancy as well. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8 states and territories make up all the legal requirements for Australia. And as I mentioned, I will add the link below, so it'll make it easier for you to find. Now, it doesn't just cover tenancies. It also covers other things as well that you may want to know your rights about. It could be in reference to work in some cases. It could be in reference to if you've bought something and it's faulty, and what to do if you need to take it back. Now, just before we continue, if you are finding value out of today's video, please click on the like button down below or make a comment about what your thoughts are about accommodation in Australia. Share it with your friends if you've got any friends that are looking for accommodation or looking to study in Australia as well, as they might find this very helpful. So back to the video.
As a fourth option, you may choose campus housing instead of living in a rental property. Although the majority of Australian students live off campus, some Australian universities do provide housing for their students through residential colleges, halls of residence, or apartments. It is important to also know here that vocational colleges rarely have accommodation available compared to universities, so you need to be aware of this. Prices and availability of accommodation vary according to university, so if this is something that you would prefer, when you have selected your chosen university, let me know and I will be able to find out pricing prior to your arrival in Australia if you are an offshore student. It's important to note that you will need to apply early as this accommodation option can be limited and it is very popular. Generally on campus, accommodation costs between 180 and 350 Australian dollars per week. So you need to weigh that up as part of your budget when you're looking to understand what is the best possible accommodation option for yourself. Option 5 is residential college. Residential colleges provide students with accommodation, meals, cleaning, and a range of services for social and academic needs. Because of the wide range of services offered, they are generally more expensive than halls of residence, which also offer accommodation but with fewer added services than residential colleges. Halls of residence accommodations include some meals and cleaning services, but self-catering facilities are also available for students who wish to be more independent in this situation.
So before we continue, a question I'd like to ask you is, what are your concerns around accommodation in Australia for when you're looking to live, work, and study here? Comment down below and let's see if I can help provide you with some solutions. So let's continue.
A final option is an apartment. Some universities offer apartments either on or close to campus for their students to rent. Under this accommodation, students have security of university-provided housing, as well as the independence of fully self-catering living. There is a wide range of accommodation options available to students in Australia, so students should put thought into choosing the option that best fits their needs. On average, 90 to 100% of students in Australia live off campus, so there are plenty of off-campus housing options from which to choose. However, this also means that the demand for housing is high, particularly housing situated close to campus. If you are offshore living outside of Australia, I highly encourage you to arrive in Australia at least 2 to 3 weeks before you start your institution's orientation so that you can get yourself settled before classes begin.
And in the next video, I'm going to discuss the 7 important things that you need to think about before you apply to study in Australia.